he said that they had found a flying saucer. That's a bunch of horse pucky. That's a weather balloon.
Washington said, cover this up.
Don't ever talk about this again.
What did crash at Roswell ultimately was the truth.
Eyewitnesses, believers, skeptics. People with unwavering opinions about a 60-year-old mystery.
We know an alien flying saucer was recovered. There were bodies found. There was a major cover-up.
What really happened outside Roswell, New Mexico? Find out as we examine the best evidence. Roswell, New Mexico. For many people, the name conjures up images of a downed flying saucer and an immense government cover-up. 6 decades after the mysterious event, eyewitnesses continue to stick to their stories.
I do think it was a craft of some kind. There was not a human manufacture. Where it came from, I don't know, but I do know it did not come from Earth.
What exactly fell out of the sky that summer is still shrouded in mystery.
Whatever it was that they really found so unsettled them that there seems to have been a panic.
This much is clear. The quiet town of Roswell was changed forever when on July the 8th, 1947, the media reported that the military had recovered an alien spaceship. The story was carried by newspapers as far apart as Chicago, California, and Washington State, as well as the local paper serving Roswell. But within hours, a different story was issued from higher up the chain of command, from a military base in Fort Worth, Texas, 800 kilometers away. Today, the Roswell incident lives on in the public imagination, but it began in an age of suspicion. World War II had just ended and was followed by a period of heightened international tension. The powerful weapons that had contributed to the end of that conflict were still threats to international peace. It was the beginning of the Cold War, and spying on the enemy became an essential tactic. Coincidentally, throughout the late 1940s, there were also many sightings of what came to be referred to as flying saucers. And so the stage was set for a small American town to become the center of a UFO mystery. In the summer of 1947, while working on a farm outside Roswell, rancher Mac Brazel discovered some unusual wreckage. He didn't think much of it, but when he began hearing stories of UFO sightings, he decided to report it to the authorities. The Roswell Army Air Base sent out its top intelligence officer. Major Jesse Marcel was attached to an elite unit, the 509th, the world's first nuclear bomber squadron.
What makes the Roswell story so different for me than other UFO stories is that I saw it. I saw it firsthand.
Major Marcel's son remembers the night his father woke him up to see something he claimed was out of this world.
When he came home that night and he woke myself and my mother up to come and look and see what he found, or at least what he retrieved from a crash site on this ranch out of Roswell. He said, I think it's part of a flying saucer. I looked very carefully at this because you probably will never see this again. And he was right.
Some eyewitnesses said the crash debris consisted of unusual materials. It was removed by the Air Force.
The military press release stated that through the cooperation of a rancher outside town, the Roswell Army Airfield had recovered the wreckage of a flying saucer. So it was headline news.
Stanton Friedman is a former nuclear physicist who has spent many years researching the Roswell incident.
There's no question in my mind that there's been a cover-up of the Roswell incident, an official government-sponsored cover-up, if you want to put it that way.
Within hours of releasing the UFO story, the military withdrew it, claiming that the debris was actually the remains of downed weather balloons. Scientists had been using latex balloons since they were developed in 1940 to carry disposable instruments into the upper atmosphere. Information was then radioed back to Earth.
Sorry, gentlemen, we made a mistake. It was not a flying saucer, just a radar reflector weather balloon combination. So within a 4-hour period, you went from Army recovers flying saucer to just a weather balloon.
They really realized that they had something very strange here, very exotic. And that's when they wanted to kill the story as soon as possible.
Retired commercial pilot Robert Durand has been investigating Roswell for almost 20 years.
The outgoing message traffic from Roswell Army Airfield was missing. And the records of the military police unit, which everybody says cleaned up the crash and protected it, also missing. They are covering this up, and they switched this stuff with the balloon.
If the debris recovered from a Roswell field was indeed from a crashed weather balloon, there should be physical evidence to prove it. But is there? In 1947, something crashed in the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. The initial and official explanation was that wreckage of an alien spacecraft had been found. But this story was quickly withdrawn as the military cleared the debris, claiming it was just an array of weather balloons. Perhaps the physical evidence can settle the dispute.
It had physical properties that just didn't match anything that human beings were making at the time.
David Rudiak has been studying the Roswell incident for over 10 years. He believes rancher Mac Brazel wasn't mistaken.
Brazel had done this interview saying, I found weather balloons on my property, but this wasn't like any of them, and it wasn't any weather observation device.
Actually, Mac Brazel was quite familiar with weather balloons because he'd seen them before. My dad went to radar school, so he knew what a radar target looked like.
In 1947, radar reflector targets were coated with commonly available commercial foil. People who believed that something otherworldly crashed near Roswell maintained that both Major Marcel and Mac Brazel would have identified this and other common materials used in weather balloons.
We all came to the conclusion this was something that was very exotic, that this is probably not a human manufacture.
There was something else that Jesse Marcel Jr. remembers seeing on the debris his father showed him.
There was some writing along the inside edge of this. And I thought, what in the world is this? So I paid a little closer attention to that. I thought at first, well, hey, this is Egyptian hieroglyphics. But then again, no, this is not Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is more like mathematical or geometrical symbols.
It wasn't long before other stories emerged about what the Air Force may have retrieved from the debris site.
General Arthur Exon, he was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, said he knew about the debris coming in. And he also said he heard about bodies being recovered.
Flying saucers and spacemen are part of popular culture, and many believe they do exist. Others are less accepting of the idea.
The least likely explanation is that an extraterrestrial craft crashed on the planet Earth from some advanced civilization and left little cute humanoid bodies looking like an advanced futuristic form of us, just as our science fiction writers had described them. Something crashed on the Brazel Ranch. It clearly doesn't describe to any reasonable person any kind of extraterrestrial craft.
Joe Nickel is a former magician who now works as a paranormal investigator.
Roswell is a vast and proliferating American myth.
Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence.
Roswell skeptics claim there's no physical evidence supporting the theory of a UFO crash.
The scientific community really isn't going to be convinced that aliens have been visiting Earth without some cold, hard evidence.
Physicist Dave Thomas is president of the advocacy group New Mexicans for Science and Reason. He says that if aliens had visited Earth, there would have been indisputable physical proof.
So far, the evidence of UFOs has been unextraordinary. It's been fuzzy photos and fuzzy memories. There are legends that have come out since then that the paper couldn't be burned or folded by any means. But if you look at the original witness descriptions, the rancher, Mac Brazel's daughter, Bessie Brazel, got to see the stuff. And she even described some rings that were part of the rigging for these complex balloons.
We want to look at the best evidence that we have, which means look at the original source, and we have that account by Mac Brazel. And based on Mac Brazel's statement, it doesn't appear to be any kind of extraterrestrial craft, unless, of course, extraterrestrials have invented tape and rubber and string and sticks and tinfoil.
But there are people who are convinced there's more to the story than sticks and tin foil.
That it was covered up and has been continued to be covered up for nearly 60 years indicates that there's some very deep, perhaps very dark secret that's involved here.
What I think really happened at Roswell, something did crash there, but it didn't come from outer space.
It's possible that the crash actually occurred a week or two before the discovery of the debris, perhaps during a storm. That might account for the wide dispersal of the debris. Ranged on the two sides of the argument are those who are convinced the debris was of alien origin, and the skeptics, who have more down-to-earth explanations. The Roswell incident of July the 8th, 1947, made headline news in America. Journalists based their initial stories on military sources. When those same sources changed the story, they produced these photographs of what appeared to be ordinary weather balloons and radar reflectors. But can we be sure that this was the material recovered from the crash site?
Well, I think it would have been a very simple process to switch the material.
Why did they switch the materials? Because they didn't dare show the real materials.
My main response to the question, was the debris switched, involves the weatherman, Irving Newton.
Warrant Officer Irving Newton was responsible for identifying the weather balloons after the debris had been transferred to Fort Worth. The base commander, General Roger Ramey, called Newton to his office.
I went over there and I opened the door to the general's office, and there they had a whole bunch of stuff laying on the floor of the office. And I says, now, is that your flying saucer? And they said, well, yes, it is. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I said, that's a bunch of horse pucky. That's a weather balloon.
He did as he was instructed. If the general said it was a radar reflector weather balloon combination, that was good enough for him. He didn't get a look at the real wreckage. He was an instrument of deception.
Rancher Mac Brazel and Major Jesse Marcel also saw the debris, but they saw it on the ground in New Mexico.
You have some descriptions by Mac Brazel in the local paper. You then see Jesse Marcel posing with some pieces of debris in a room. That looks exactly consistent with what Mac Brazel said. Foiled paper, sticks, you can match it up. It looks very similar.
But some people believe that similar is not good enough.
And the radar target, if you look at it closely as I have, it adds up to exactly one radar target. If you look at the back side of it, the white paper backing, it's totally clean. There are no scrape marks, there's no mud, there's no dirt, there's no water stains on it. So it looks to me there's no string attached to it, which it should have been if it had actually been recovered in the field. It looks to me this is a brand new radar target. They took it out of a box, they broke it up, threw it on the floor.
I'm convinced that what was photographed in General Ramey's office in Texas was not the real wreckage.
Now, someone is trying to say, well, that's a bunch of crap, that really they substitute something. I cannot say that positively 100% they didn't.
What we think crashed at Roswell was part of a project called Project Mogul.
Project Mogul used high-altitude listening devices suspended from weather balloons. It was theorized that they might detect nuclear tests carried out in the Soviet Union. If this equipment came down in the desert, it could have been the source of the debris. In 1947 and 48, a series of balloons was launched from Alamogordo, another military installation in New Mexico. Prevailing winds carried many of them northeast, towards Roswell. Mogul Flight Number 4, launched on June the 4th, 1947, may have fallen to Earth on the Brazel Ranch.
That is very likely what was found on the Brazel Ranch by Mac Brazel. This was the beginning of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was developing nuclear weapons. We had nuclear weapons, but we didn't want them to, and we wanted to find out if they were exploding them in tests.
Well, certainly the Mogul project itself was highly classified. And the military did not want anybody reporting, oh, we're trying to get microphones to spy on Soviet atomic tests.
But how do the skeptics explain the strange hieroglyphics that intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel saw on some of the fragments?
There was a toy company in Manhattan called Merrick Manufacturing, and on the side, they manufactured these radar reflectors for the Army Signal Corps. The toy company evidently had some reinforcing tape that had these strange sort of hieroglyphic symbols on them. And I think when Marcel saw the strange alien markings and this unusual sort of metallic paper that was resistant to folding, I think that convinced Marcel that he'd found something that was not of this earth.
In 1997, the Air Force issued its third report on the Roswell incident.
We think that this answers lots of questions, and it answers them logically and with integrity.
They hoped that this investigation would finally put the spacecraft rumors to rest. The report concluded that news of an alien spacecraft crash was the result of a mixture of incomplete and inaccurate contemporary accounts. It reiterated the explanation that the debris was from Project Mogul. Both believers and skeptics agree there was a cover-up, but they disagree on what was being concealed.
So yeah, there was a cover-up, and I think there were probably good reasons for a cover-up, assuming this was really an alien spaceship crash. And I think one of the primary concerns would have been public panic.
The truth of the matter is that what crashed was basically identified, and it was not either of the two big things that people were concerned about. It was not extraterrestrial, was not any threat to the planet Earth.
The reason for Mogul was super top secret, but the equipment, which is what we're talking about here, had no security classification at all. It was just off-the-shelf stuff. They lost half of the Mogul arrays that they launched and could care less. They didn't even go after one that went down 15 miles away from them.
Believers and skeptics disagree over nearly every aspect of the Roswell incident. One question stands out above all the rest. Could the balloon and radar reflector wreckage from Project Mogul ever match the strange and enormous debris field described by Major Jesse Marcel? Crash test engineer Robert Galgansky has investigated this aspect of the crash.
I just became fascinated with the debris field. The reason I really developed an intense interest in this particular aspect of the story was because there was something tangible that I could work with. There were dimensions given for this field, there were description given of the debris that was recovered, and I felt that I could do something with this from a quantitative standpoint. No one had tried doing that before.
Many believers and skeptics maintain that the authorities were anxious to cover up the details of the debris field because of the secrecy surrounding Project Mogul. But believers in the alien spaceship crash say there's been another cover-up: the corpses of its occupants. Rumors have circulated for decades that there was more than just debris. There were alien bodies. According to Roswell believers, the bodies were taken to Hangar 84 at the Roswell base.
This is where the action was. The bodies were brought here, they were kept here, probably with some dry ice.
If there are ghosts of Roswell, this abandoned building is their home.
Matter of fact, I would expect the bodies are still around somewhere. You want to run tests on them, lots and lots of tests.
The alien body theory has its roots in a story told by a local mortician.
There's a military protocol for handling bodies.
Years after the Roswell incident, Glenn Dennis came forward, claiming that he had received a call from the military base inquiring about small caskets and how to deal with bodies decomposed by the desert sun.
He asked, was there a crash? They said, well, these are hypothetical questions. And he gets inside and sees a nurse that he knows. And she told him, you ought to get out of here. They're going to give you a hard time, etc. The officer that was there threatens him. And he says, well, you can't threaten me, I'm a civilian. And then the officer has him escorted back to the Ballard Funeral Home.
Glenn claims that he ran into his nurse friend the next day, who was shaken. She told him of her involvement in an alien autopsy.
She made a drawing, described the beings. The relative lengths of the arm were different, for example, from us, and 4 fingers. Skinny little guys with big heads.
The skeptics have a different interpretation. They say that a military aircraft crashed near Roswell, killing all on board.
The airplane explosion burned several crew members so badly that parts of their faces were gone, their bowels were hanging out. It smelled terrible. We think that the nurse, when she drew pictures, she was actually drawing pictures of these burned, shrunk, emaciated bodies. And yeah, they kind of look like aliens, but they also look like what happens when you get burned up in a jet fuel explosion.
Glenn Dennis is one of those who tells different versions of things and quote unquote remembers things, and as people ask him questions and come back and he's read and more conspiracy theories and heard and talked back and forth with people, he gets confused about the facts. And in fact, we didn't have any indication even at the time of extraterrestrial bodies. All of that stuff shows up decades later.
Spy balloons and government cover-ups, or aliens and their spacecraft. Which side is closer to the truth?
I think there was initially an absence of malice, and then, once you start telling a lie, it gets harder and harder to not tell the lie.
I think we do now know reasonably certainly what happened at Roswell. That thing that crashed was a secret United States government spy balloon. I've already said too much.
Since 1947, much has been said and written about Roswell, but the dispute is still unresolved. Perhaps the only way to put it to rest is with a modern-day experiment. Believers and skeptics agree that something crashed near Roswell in 1947 and that there was a cover-up. Believers claim that there has been a continuing suppression of information about the crash landing of an alien spacecraft. Their opponents say that what the authorities were hiding was a secret project to monitor Soviet atomic testing. After more than 6 decades, the eyewitness accounts remain one of the key pieces of evidence in the Roswell incident. Major Jesse Marcel, one of the first military investigators on the scene, was convinced that he saw something out of the ordinary.
My dad went to radar school, so he knew what a radar target looked like. And if it was that, he would never bothered picking it up off the desert. He just left it stay out there.
Major Marcel, basically his field of operations was assessment of bomb damage from photographs.
Skeptics claim that he never seen a weather balloon or radar target in his life, and how they determine that, I don't know, unless they've held seances with him, since he died.
We shouldn't engage, we shouldn't engage in the faulty logic of what's called an argument from ignorance, which is, I don't know what I saw, therefore, it's a flying saucer from Mars. No, if you don't know what you saw, you don't know what you saw.
I think Marcel, in the atmosphere of the flap of 47, he thought he'd found something really unusual. It wasn't his expertise. I think Marcel was out of his element.
Eyewitness accounts, accusations of tampering with evidence and talk of an official cover-up are all part of the Roswell flying saucer legend. 3 official reports issued by the Air Force in the 1990s maintained that the debris came from a secret spy balloon project known as Project Mogul. A typical array was roughly 150 meters long, containing around 24 weather balloons. It had 3 metallic reflectors so that it could be tracked by radar. The helium-filled balloons lifted sensitive listening devices to extremely high altitudes. The rubber weather balloons were soon replaced by larger balloons made of polyethylene. These were more durable and were better suited to maintaining a constant altitude. Although Project Mogul was a secret operation, the equipment was disposable. If a similar array of balloons could be brought down, perhaps the debris field would mimic the one recorded at Roswell. This array is 70 meters long, smaller than the Project Mogul arrangement. At this scale, it will be easier to control. The rig consists of meteorological balloons and radar reflectors similar to those used by the Air Force in the 1940s. Computer-generated graphics simulated the experiment. It was designed by Peter Chesney, a Hollywood special effects engineer.
This gives us a sense of sort of what we're dealing with. What are the sort of logistical issues of what we might play with? You know, how this stuff, you know, should it be rigged that way or, you know, along the load line itself?
Even before the experiment began, there was uncertainty about whether it would be definitive.
I don't know how it's going to turn out. I have no idea. And frankly, I think because the standard approach of the debunker is don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up, that if it turns out that Galgansky is right on, isn't enough wreckage to account for what was seen. They will ignore that.
The experiment will be observed by Roswell skeptic Joe Nickell and Roswell believer Robert Galgansky.
How are you proposing to bring the train down?
Oh, we've got a couple ideas. We've got a pellet gun we're going to try.
Kyle, don't miss.
Don't worry.
We have some nichrome wire that I think is going to work pretty good.
Of the filament on the balloon. There we go. That's not going anywhere. All right, let's plug it in.
Good.
That's part of that. So we're ready to pop this thing.
All right, you got the voltage right?
It's all set.
Okay, good.
Here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Okay, looks like pellet rifle works. Hot wire works as a good backup. Next, we're going to wind up about 400 feet on our temporary reel. We got a little leverage on the handle, and we're about ready to head out of Dodge.
The night before the experiment, the team verifies that the Project Mogul balloon train can be assembled as planned.
1 minute left in this one. Trying to find it.
To do this, they need a controlled environment.
Hold it there, Pete.
An aircraft hangar fits the bill.
So on the day, you can get a sense of how we're gonna line up. So you can pray to the wind gods that they behave for the morning. So we'll just drive it around once and we can see what it does.
To test for wind resistance, 2 balloons are towed at a controlled speed around the hangar. The buoyancy must be precise. A miscalculation and all the balloons and reflectors could break free and pose a hazard to aircraft in the vicinity.
There we go. 7.5. No, 4.2. Okay, let her go. Just see how it's hanging. Is that a good distance between target?
Okay.
This is 2 pounds. No, wait,
There.
we have a buoyancy surplus on this.
We do?
You know,
Okay. All right.
we have an 11-to-1 buoyancy surplus.
We're going to take the balloon, we're going to launch it, and we're going to start shooting down the balloons with an air rifle, and eventually it's just going to come down in a heap.
We're feeling like we're just about ready to roll out the hangar and get on out. As long as we beat the afternoon breeze, we had a good chance of, you know, playing out the experiment. So the sooner we get out there, the better, before we start shredding latex all over the landscape. And right now we have totally still conditions, which is really good balloon flying.
The calm weather is ideal. Too much wind during the test could blow away weeks of work.
Well, that's a balloon. I thought that was... I'm gonna let this go straight up now.
Filling 12 weather balloons with helium is a time-consuming process.
We're halfway there once we put this balloon on.
Beautiful.
You have plenty of time for the wind to come up and make a big spaghetti mess out of it. Okay, so here you go. It's on the load line.
Number 12.
Lucky number 12.
Here we go.
Say when, Pete.
Keep going.
Keep going.
We gotta get this parachute off the ground.
With the balloon array completed, radar reflectors and a parachute are attached. And lastly, a mock-up of Mogul's microphone system.
What do you think, Bob?
It looks good. I like it. Mogul is launched.
Nice.
Yes, sir.
The replica Project Mogul balloon train rises as expected. Once the array reaches its designated height, it's time to shoot it down and create a debris field.
Ready?
Go for it.
Get underneath the load line and you can probably get 4 or 5 in one pellet so it's not floating all the way down.
Pick your
Line it
spot.
up.
Okay. Fourth from the top, drifting on down.
4 for 3, Kyle. It's getting low.
All right. Oh, that one caught on the target.
Got it. Okay, here we go, last one.
Here it comes. All over.
There's your debris field. Go get them.
Robert Galgansky, who believes that a spacecraft crashed at Roswell, homes in on the loose rope, something not mentioned in contemporary accounts.
And you would think that the targets would have something on there. I mean, look, they're tied right here. Would you be able to pull this off without any evidence of any line at all? It seems highly unlikely, really.
Joe Nickel isn't impressed by the experiment.
I fear that there may be a lot of hot air, and I'm not talking about the balloons.
I think the results of this experiment will show to anybody with an open mind that Mogul did not have the volume of material to cause even the Brazil debris field, let alone what Marcel reported.
Major Marcel reported that the crashed debris was scattered over an area more than 1 kilometer long and about 100 meters wide. The experimental debris field from 12 balloons, roughly half the original Mogul's size, has a diameter of only 45 meters.
I think what this will prove is that any reasonable estimate of the amount of debris in any sort of Mogul crash doesn't amount to a whole lot.
You know, recreating it is going to be a shot in the dark. You know, if they can do it, wow. If they can't, I don't think it disproves the Mogul hypothesis.
I think that this kind of experiment is really predicated on too many assumptions. There's very little data.
This is typical of what you'd expect would happen.
Notice here that look at all the line there. Right? You'd expect that. With the load line, you'd expect to see something. The odd thing about the Roswell debris field was that there was no line found at all, period. And if we go over toward the radar targets, there's all the supporting lines. You can see the shroud lines from the parachute, but not a stitch on the debris field. And the Air Force didn't even show any in their pictures in 47.
But what does this mean for the believers?
I think what it shows that there's no such thing as a balloon crash per se. It's a balloon landing. Okay, so there's nothing really spectacular that happens on the impact.
I think this experiment proves there was a Project Mogul, and this looks exactly like we thought it would look, and we've confirmed that Mogul consisted of these elements. The exact way the debris is scattered, of course, this is not like it would have been with something coming down in a storm and being ripped and shredded and distributed over a period of time.
No one is certain what may have caused a Project Mogul array to crash. The sun could have degraded the balloon material, causing it to burst. The recovered debris may have lain in the desert for up to 2 weeks, shredded and scattered by the wind.
It's unrealistic to think that anything like this, made of mundane materials, could have been broken up and scattered to the extent that it would create something that would be construed as a debris field.
Who knows what that debris should exactly look like? We weren't there when it was being shredded. So the idea that we somehow know how a corner radar reflector will always look when it's been torn up is just folly.
12 weather balloons, 3 radar reflectors, a parachute, a microphone package, and hundreds of feet of nylon line, now just piles of debris lying in a field. This experiment has only served to divide the two camps further.
The importance here is the way the components landed and what happened to them immediately afterward. In other words, they weren't smashed to smithereens. It doesn't look like they were torn apart. And again, the most important thing to me is the fact that there's no cord, there's no load line, there's no monofilament line used to suspend the targets, to suspend the balloons from the load line. This is not there in the Roswell pictures.
The arguments put forth by believers and skeptics hang on more than balloons and foil reflectors.
If you go back to the papers, it was the story of the day for weeks and weeks. And it created an environment in which people were expecting strange and unusual stuff to fall out of the sky.
There were actually a number of targets that went down throughout the United States around the same time, and the local papers show pictures of them, and they look just like that. Okay, they're not broken up, they're pretty much intact. Somebody will find part of a balloon, maybe the neck and a little bit of the carcass, and that's what you have right here.
For the skeptics, the experimental results are inconclusive.
What's happening is that the proponents have started with the answer they want, and they're looking over all the stuff, and they're saying, yeah, we can say this about that.
Several questions remain about the Roswell incident. Was there a conspiracy to conceal other information? The believers claim that some key eyewitnesses were threatened into silence. Was it part of a government cover-up? Jesse Marcel Jr. recalls the night his father returned home from the Roswell Air Base, where the debris was first stored.
He sat my mother and myself down and said, "Don't ever talk about this again. This is so highly classified that nothing was to be said about this."
The rancher Mac Brazel was also allegedly threatened. After finding the debris, he gave interviews describing what he had witnessed.
They held him at the base for about a week and said they'd thrown him in jail and he'd been forced to take a security oath not to talk about what had happened.
Some claim that following his release from the military base, Brazel's story changed dramatically. He went to see radio journalist Frank Joyce.
He says, "I was told to come here and tell you this story about the weather balloon, and if I didn't do it, it would go hard with you and with me."
Why would the military use threats if the recovered crashed debris was simply weather balloons and radar reflectors? Skeptics dismiss these stories as flights of fancy on the part of Roswell believers.
A supposedly secret government group that exists to keep from the American public the awful, fearful secret that extraterrestrials have crashed on the planet Earth. These pickled humanoids are kept at some secret facility.
And it's all a big hoax.
If it was a hoax or a cover-up, how far up the chain of command did the trail lead? Could it have reached as far as the commander-in-chief, the president himself? The people ranged on both sides of the Roswell controversy seem totally unmoved by the arguments of their opponents. They look at the same evidence and draw different conclusions. Perhaps the only conclusive proof resides in the archives of President Harry Truman. In 1984, a microfilm surfaced that contained a document which appeared to date from September 1947. In it, the president apparently orders his defense secretary to create a group called Majestic 12, or MJ-12, to deal with the recovery of crashed spacecraft. Believers in the Roswell crash are keen to accept this evidence.
My position is that the Truman document is authentic. So I am not maintaining that all MJ-12 documents are genuine. I'm saying the Truman Forrestal memo is authentic.
As soon as I saw the MJ-12 documents, I thought, yeah, that's either a genuine Truman signature or one of the best forgeries I've ever seen.
Skeptics find the majestic 12 story far-fetched.
There's several things wrong. The very nature of this document itself is that it purports to be a memorandum, it says so, but then it switches not to have the format of a standard memorandum, but it has elements that we associate with letters, dear, what we call a greeting. So this is half memorandum, half letter. You cannot find this hybridized, confused mix of part memo, part letter in their documents.
If this secret military group existed, where would documents like this come from?
What's its provenance? Where did you get it? Well, the MJ-12 document fails that big time because we don't know where these documents came from other than they showed up anonymously on a roll of film. There's a rule in law called the best evidence rule that says that you must not use evidence of a lesser quality when better evidence is available. And it's specifically applied in document cases to mean that you need the original. When something is serious, you need to have examined the original. You should not settle for a copy. And in this case, what we have is such an inferior copy that's not like an accepted, attested, notarized copy from a Bureau of Vital Statistics or something. We might be prepared to accept that as reasonably authentic in a situation. It's an accepted principle in dealing with documents that you cannot authenticate a document from a copy because the matter is, the document is not there to be examined. Because you can't examine the paper, the ink, all the things that a document examiner would really expect to scrutinize. When Truman signed his, and again, I've looked at just hundreds of his signatures to see if this was true, his pen stroke here, this long line sweeping across the page, invariably cuts into his text or touches it. He wrote very close to the last line of everything he signed. Now, occasionally a printer printing his name on a document or something places it where it looks good. And that's what's been done here. This is far low for Harry Truman. I've never seen this ever in a genuine Truman signed document.
Joe Nickel also points out that no two signatures are ever exactly alike.
When we try to superimpose one over the other, we see that try as we will, they just won't match. And we take this particular October 1st, 1947 genuine Truman letter, which I have here in a transparency, and we move them together, we see that they, in fact, exactly superimpose. Only the inept, incompetent, amateurish forger who did the MJ-12 documents made that mistake.
But the fact that Roswell has graduated to the world stage of popular culture suggests that the alien crash story will continue to place this little New Mexican town in the spotlight.
The reason I think it hasn't gone away is because something really did happen, that was far more than just a balloon crash. I think if there hadn't been any substance to this, even the ufologists would have given up on it a long time ago.
To my mind, the discovery of anything involving an extraterrestrial spacecraft would be the most wonderful, most positive, most incredible scientific discovery in human history. As a science journalist, I would just hop all over that story if I thought there was any reality to it whatsoever.
We've got people pretty much entrenched now in their positions, and one group is saying, we started with the evidence, and we saw where it led, and it led to Project Mogul. And the other group is saying, we want very much to believe in flying saucers, and we're not giving it up. And are those two groups ever going to be reconciled? Probably not in my lifetime.
The whereabouts of the famous Roswell debris remain a mystery. Skeptics say it was probably disposed of years ago. Believers think it's still under wraps somewhere. Roswell's best evidence remains elusive. As long as there are believers and skeptics, and authorities that seem capable of sustaining a cover-up or a campaign of misinformation, the whole truth about the Roswell incident may never be known.